the importance of empathy, the idea that I know how you feel. It's not how I think you feel, it's how you actually feel. And there's actually some evidence in the research area that shows that many brand managers, in fact, have a very distorted image in their mind of who their customer actually is. It's usually a projection of themselves rather than the actual customer. So getting to know the customer is extremely important. But talking to that customer is another story. I'd like you to guess, how many commercial messages do you think the average consumer is exposed to in a single day? Any kind of messages at all. Does anybody think that it's at least 50? Anybody think it's 50? More than 50? 500. More? 500 is a lot. That's even more than the number of booths over in the, almost the number of booths over in the exhibition hall. So maybe it's 1,000, right? That would really be bad. You can all guess where I'm going, right? The true number is over 5,000 messages a day, over 5,000. But that, I submit to you, is the biggest challenge that we have in marketing today, is simply breaking through the clutter and getting the attention of these consumers who are actually very jaded. They're very used to getting these messages all the time. The millennials and the iGens and so on have grown up being marketed to. So how do we break through that clutter and really connect with them? That is the primary challenge that we have. So the industry is starting to shift to this idea of getting, ROI, traditional ROI is still important, but also looking at metrics, because we're all about developing metrics. How do we measure what we're doing? If you can't measure it, it's not worth doing, right? So for example, we have this kind of approach here, where you have major companies, major consulting firms that are developing frameworks that look specifically at engagement. And so they're talking about intimacy, they're talking about influence between people, involvement and interaction. These are not things that we typically measure in a marketing campaign, but I think they're extremely important. So we talk in my field of consumer behavior about the extended self, and that means that many products are consumed because we think of them as being a part of our self-identity. It could be, of course, the Brazilian football team is a part of many Brazilians' identity, and their moods rise and fall with the fortunes of the team. Maybe not a great year to talk about that, but certainly sports is one way that we can extend ourselves. We have to change our focus in terms of how we do branding research. And there are several changes that are going on right now. The traditional perspective is that brands are assets that are created and controlled by the firm. You think of the brand, you develop the brand, consumers buy the brand. Today, we need to look at brands as co-created entities. That is, you play a part in it, but your consumers also play a role in deciding what your brand means. Brands exist in the minds of consumers. Not really. Brands live in cultures. And so many times we have, as members of a culture, shared meanings that are extremely important. Finally, a focus, especially in our measurement, of what brands mean. Well, that's important, but today we have to also look at how brands come to mean. That is, brands have a life cycle, we know that. So how does their meaning change, especially as they become co-created entities where your consumers over time are changing the meaning of your brand? Very important to keep in mind these three evolutions. So how do we create this kind of resonance? Well, let me back up and share with you one of my favorite sayings, which is, in this world, there are two kinds of people. People who think there are two kinds of people and people who don't. And what that means is that we're taught to put people into categories. Many of you have your MBAs or your undergraduate degrees in marketing. You were taught to put people into categories in what we call the positivist tradition of science. And that means we love to make quadrants, we love to collect data and assign people to all of these labels. And so many different marketing schemes involve assigning people to these categories. That's the basis of a lot of marketing strategy. So for example, market segmentation, one of the oldest and best known. Are your customers old or young, rich or poor? Do they live here or there? And on that basis, you're going to create a segment, and then you're going to develop your campaign to target people in that segment. Is the age that we sometimes call postmodernism. And part of postmodernism means that traditional boundaries and categories no longer apply. So that your consumers are breaking out of these boxes or these categories, and you need to understand that. So let's take an example. Social class segmentation, rich and poor. Well, you all know this product, right? Havaianas, did I say that? I probably didn't say that right, but I certainly know what they are. I think you know the story. They have a very nice brand story, which is it started out as a very low-class worker's shoe, very inexpensive. Over time, it becomes more of a fashion item. It gets a lot of colors put on it and different options and so on. So my argument is that these stale categories that we use block the path to resonance. We need to abandon them. So the first one, the traditional wall that we have, is me versus we. Myself versus everybody else. Me as a lone decision maker versus the world. So in my day, I'm not a millennial, as you can probably guess. And what does that mean for marketing? Well, for one thing, we're seeing an explosion in the use of user-generated content, where your customers are pooling together to submit ideas to you. Like this Burberry campaign, very successful for them, where they had many of their customers submit photos of how they use the traditional Burberry trench coat in different ways. And in the process, that's a way to engage them because they're seeing how their peers are using the product as well. Okay, the second wall that I'll get to, hype versus buzz. Hype is marketer-created interest in a product. Buzz is naturally created interest in a product. So we know that word of mouth is king. We know that advertising plays a role, but it actually has never influenced people to buy. It influences people to learn more about a brand and think about it. But today, especially, word of mouth is what gets people to buy in just about every category, in the later stages when they're comparing options, etc. So that's why it's become so important. Many of you probably do this, to do what we call web scraping, where you can use sophisticated methodologies to actually look in real time and find out what are people posting about your brand. And I guarantee you, while you're sitting here, they're posting about it right now. So we want to know not only who's posting about it and the volume of posts. We want to know, is it good or bad, and what other terms are they posting at the same time? So with methodologies like this, we can see what terms appear together. The third wall, offline versus online. This is an important one. So what we're seeing is emerging today, emerging of the two states of being offline and being online. So in the old days, we have a dichotomy. You're either offline or you're online. Today, I believe that that is an artificial distinction. In fact, many of you right now are both offline and online, because I can see you looking at your phones while I'm talking, right? So you're going back and forth, you're walking around all day like this, you know. You're maybe looking up, maybe you're not, maybe you're talking to your friend next to you, maybe you're talking to your friend on the phone. Who cares? You're still talking to your friend. So this digital dichotomy is essentially obsolete. And what does that mean for us? Well, we know that it's, of course, changing the way consumers live, the way we all live. We know that here in Brazil, internet penetration is pretty high. Amazingly, almost all of it is coming from mobile phones. So what that means is that everybody is walking around living their lives back and forth, online, offline, on their phone. There's a lot of new product development going on, including fashion, but many other things as well, architecture and so on, where people are creating new designs in virtual worlds first before they take them into the real world. The fourth wall, and I'm going to talk very quickly because I've still got four to go. Owning versus renting. We used to think that owning stuff was really valuable. The pride of ownership. Young people today in particular do not want to own things. They want to rent things, and that is challenging business models in many categories. So we have what I call collaborative consumption, where people are no longer owning what they use, they're leasing it temporarily. It makes a lot of economic sense in many categories. You all know about Airbnb. You may know some of the automobile, like BMW's programs, where you basically just pick up a car and you drop it off an hour later when you're done. Bike sharing, music sharing, book sharing, tool sharing among consumers. Very important change. Wall number 4, male versus female. Mars versus Venus. So we're redefining the meaning of gender today in very important and controversial ways. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? We have a lot of controversy like this Brazilian campaign that I'm sure you've all seen. How do we change the traditional kind of bimbo stereotype of a woman and make it more modern and acceptable and so on? We have transgender issues. A lot of that I know goes on in Brazil as it does in my country. So you have a model on the front page of Elle who is a transgender model here in Brazil. So what that means is we have companies that are starting to make androgynous products for both men and women, like this company, MeUndies, does that. It also raises questions about what's appropriate for each gender to buy and use. So should men wear bracelets? Should men carry handbags, so-called man bags? How do we categorize all these things in an age where being male or female is no longer what we assumed it was? The 6th wall is flesh versus machine. Very interesting one. Not only do we put things on our bodies, we put things in our bodies, but we also know that there's an explosion in wearable technology. How many of you are wearing an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, anything like that right now? Anybody? Yeah, okay. So we know that we're starting to wear computers on our bodies, but we can also think about products as delivery systems. So I worked with DuPont for a while. This is a pair of pantyhose, but it actually delivers, in this case, caffeine as a woman wears it, and actually caffeine reduces cellulite. So products as delivery systems. Final wall, producer versus consumer. Producer versus consumer. So again, consumer-generated content. Doritos in the United States has sponsored a campaign for our Super Bowl 10 years in a row where everyday consumers filmed their own commercials, and the winner was shown during the Super Bowl halftime. Very expensive ad time. For 10 years in a row, that commercial was the most memorable commercial of all the commercials that were shown during the Super Bowl. Here in Brazil, Whirlpool, this B-blend product people are talking about, they enlisted consumers, early, what my predecessor called super consumers, to actually select the flavors that would go into that. So we have this sharing economy where everyday people are getting involved in business. Perhaps it's like this, another Brazilian company that is enlisting the aid of its customers to go out and sell for it. Not to mention the direct selling model. I know that Amway and Avon and so on are very big in Brazil. That's a huge change as well. So what I've tried to do is present 7 obsolete categories. There are others, but these are some important ones. I encourage you to think out of the box. That is where the opportunities are. So I hope that you all will go out and tear down some walls when you leave here, and obrigado.